Hey guys, it's Kyle down here at Luna-Cycle. Today I'm going to show you how to install the Luna Deluxe 2118 wheel set for the Talaria Sting. I'm also going to show you how to install a bigger sprocket and extend the chain. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is remove your rear wheel. To do that you need a 17 mil socket, and you also need to hold the other side with a 6 mil Allen key. So go ahead and get a decent size ratchet and socket and go ahead and loosen your rear wheel. You can then remove the axle nut, and you should be able to start to push this out by hand, the axle. Once you get the axle about halfway out, it's good to go ahead and roll the chain off of the sprocket. You can take your chain off just like that. You do have your little axle block. Then you can pull the axle all the way out, and then you do want to pull the wheel straight back and then remove the brake and the brake bracket. Because we are installing a bigger sprocket on the new wheels, I am going to go ahead and extend this chain right now. We do have a close-up on the bench of how to properly extend the chain. So here we have our stock length chain, we have the extension, and then we have the new master link that you have to add. So when you're done, there will be 2 master links and then this piece of chain right in the middle. My favorite tool is needle nose pliers for this. You do want to remove this little clip. This can be a little bit tricky, but if you're patient, you'll get this little clip off. Just go ahead and remove that clip and don't lose it. Then it's time to pull this little plate off. If you're using an O-ring chain, which all our bikes currently come with, there will be 2 O-rings on each side of the chain, so 4 O-rings total. So here's one master link with 2 O-rings still left on the bottom side here. I'm going to go ahead and add our little extension to this. Reinstall the 2 rings that just came off. Put this little plate back on. If chain is going this direction, you want this clip like this. Now you may need to push down and squish those little O-rings together, and then be sure this is all the way closed. You don't want, but you will get it. And again, double check that these clips are fully inserted and closed. Alright, the next thing you want to do is remove the front wheel. With the factory fork and also with the fast ace fork, there are 4 pinch bolts. With the factory fork, the pinch bolts are right in the front. If you have a fast ace, the pinch bolts are going to be hidden on the bottom. So go ahead and loosen 2 of the pinch bolts. Then you do want to at least loosen the big main axle bolt on the end. Unthread that a few turns. Then you can go ahead and loosen the other 2 pinch bolts. You should be able to just hit the axle bolt and it'll get the axle started. You can fully remove the bolt and you should be able to just push the axle out with your finger. Alright, so here on the table I have the rear wheel and all of the little accessories that come with the wheel set. I also have the front and rear rotor. Today we're going to be upgrading the sprocket to a 52 tooth sprocket. On this napkin here I got the wheel bushings, the little wheel seals for the hub, the front wheel bushings and the little seals that go with those. I also have the rotor bolts, the sprocket bolts, the 6mm hex key to tighten the sprocket. These rotor bolts use a 30 Torx for the rear. So I like to start with the sprocket side. You will notice there's 2 different oil seals. The one that goes on the sprocket is the bigger one. Usually you can just push these in by hand, get it nice and flush. Sometimes they can be a little bit tight. If it gives you any trouble, you can just use plastic mallet or a rubber mallet and just tap it till it's flush. Now it's time to go ahead and install the sprocket. Sprocket uses 6 M8 bolts. Go ahead and just get these finger tight. And then you do want to crank these down very, very tight when you're done. 30 Newton meters is the torque spec on these. So you do want to use a somewhat longer Allen key when you tighten these down so you can get some leverage. Alright, once you've got them somewhat snug, now it's time to really tighten these down. You want to tighten this one, then the opposite one, then the opposite one, then the opposite one. And you want to go through these a couple times to make sure these are tight. There's a lot of power going through these sprockets, so you don't want these to fall out. Alright, once you've got the sprocket nice and tight, you can flip the wheel over to the rotor side. And you may notice there's now 12 holes on the rotor side. We knew it was very difficult for some guys to source rotors with the Talaria bolt pattern, which is the very big bolt pattern, and it's not very common or easy to find. You really don't have many options. So we decided to have the hub made with the same bolt pattern as the front. So you can now run front rotors on the rear. Front rotors are very easy to find, readily available in all different styles. But today we're going to be reusing the stock Talaria rotor. But before we install this, we do want to install a little oil seal. Should go in just with your thumbs. Just get it nice and flush. Now if you're reusing the Talaria rotor, the torque spec on the bolts is 10 Newton meters. If you're using the smaller front, it's 8 Newton meters. The bolts are a little smaller, so the torque spec is a little bit less. And the stock ones are T30, which is the star-shaped tool. And again, you want to tighten these in the same order. So you tighten one and then go to the opposite one. And again, you don't want these falling out, so go ahead and go through these twice. Now it's time to install the two wheel bushings. The taller bushing goes on the sprocket side and the shorter one goes on the rotor side. Now there is something I want to show you. There is a little sleeve that goes in between the two bearings, and this sleeve can move out of the way and make it difficult or impossible to install these bushings. So it may be a little hard to see. See how this inner sleeve isn't perfectly lined up with the bushings? Usually you can just stick your finger in one end and align it properly, but you may need to stick a screwdriver or a wrench in there and then push this up to where it's in the middle. And you should be able to feel when these bushings pop into place. So install the rotor side and the sprocket side. It doesn't hurt to add a small amount of grease to this little seal. It'll keep it quiet in the long term. You can do that to both sides. On the rotor side, be sure not to get it on the rotor. Installing the bushings and rotor on the front wheel is much easier, and you've likely done this if you assembled your bike. You do have to add the little O-ring to the little wheel bushings, and then you know these can be a little frustrating to get into place. Just be patient and don't force it. I do like to put this little bushing on the front on the rotor side before I install the rotor. It seems to be a little easier that way. So with these 21-inch wheels, we do recommend a 220 mil rotor. The wheels are bigger, they're harder to stop, and then when you have a 220 mil rotor, it's less likely that your brake caliper will rub against these big spokes. You can find a link in our description on where you can buy all the Luna 220 front rotors. So now it's time to install the six rotor bolts. And again, the torque spec on these smaller ones is 8 Newton meters. You want to tighten them in the same steps as you did the rear. Alright, now it's time to install the other bushing and install the wheel on the bike. Alright, now it's time to install the front wheel. If you have the Talaria factory fork, you do need to remove the front fender. This tire is so big that if you bottom out the fork, it will make contact with the fender. So it's really not safe to ride it with this fender installed. So be sure to remove this front fender. Now if you assembled your Talaria at home, you've already installed the front wheel. This one is a little bit bigger, so you do need to be a little patient getting it through the little mud guards. And then again, just eyeball the rotor, get the rotor up into the caliper. And the factory fork, the axle only goes from this side of the bike to the other side. So just carefully get the axle in here. Then you want to tighten down your axle cap. This one goes pretty tight on the factory fork. And the most important part is to tighten the 4 pinch bolts. You don't want to leave one of these loose, so go left, right until they are very tight. On the factory fork, you don't go above 10 Newton meters, or you can strip out the bolt or your fork. Alright, and finally you're going to install the rear wheel. The first thing you want to do is line the brake caliper up with the rotor, and it'll kind of pop itself into place. The little brake mount should jump right onto the axle. And then there is a groove right here on the brake mount, which goes into this little notch on the frame. You do want to be sure to line that up. So take your time. You want to come straight from the back. And be sure you have this brake mount lined up properly. Next, you can get your axle installed. And because you went to a bigger sprocket size, you will need to either move the wheel forward or back, depending on the sprocket size. And I'll show you how to do that now. Go ahead and roll your chain onto place. And because we went to a bigger sprocket, I do need to adjust this little adjuster forward in order to get this axle block on here. So with a 10 mil, you do loosen this little jam nut right here. And you can move the little adjuster forward. And you want to do that evenly on either side. Alright, so you want to adjust your tensioners to where you have 10 to 25 millimeters of play in the chain. You don't want the chain too tight, and you also don't want it too loose. So once you're happy with the chain tension, it is time to tighten this wheel down. It's 55 Newton meters on this nut, so you do want this very, very tight. Just give the axle nut very good push. Alright, so now you've successfully installed your Luna 18-21-inch dirt wheel set. You've also installed a bigger sprocket. You do want to check the tire pressure before you go ride. We try to ship these at 20 psi. With the rim lock, you can run a much lower pressure and not have to worry about flats. So get out there and ride.